All right, John chapter 9 and 10. 9 is one long story about a man who was born blind that was healed by Jesus. And then the Pharisees didn't understand, didn't believe, and so they questioned him, then his parents, and then ultimately Jesus for doing it on the Sabbath. But what you see in this chapter, kind of reading between the lines, is the extent that an unbeliever will go to in order to disprove Jesus as Lord. Because unbelievers don't want Jesus to be their Lord because they want to be their own Lord and continue to sin in freedom. Well, it's perceived freedom. You're actually not free at all. You're a slave to the sin. You can't stop doing it if you wanted to. And so what this story also shows us is how powerful a testimony is to the radical transformation that comes about through the gospel. And so first they ask him, hey, why is this man blind? Did he sin or did his parents sin? And that was a belief that if someone had a physical illness or ailment or disease, then it must be because of sin. And in a way that is true. I mean, when God created the world, before mankind fell into sin through Adam and Eve, there was no weakness or illness or ailments. Man would have been eternal and lived on this earth forever. That was the intent. And then sin comes into the world, and we see in Genesis, this is why I believe Genesis is literal, and you have to read it literal. It's not a poem. It's not a object lesson, an illustration, an analogy, but a day is a day, and people that lived 900 years lived 900 years. And over the course of history, people began living less and less. And that's because of sin. It came into the world, and it corrupted every faculty of your being. But anyways, it wasn't that this man sinned that caused his disease, but there's another reason for his sin that Jesus is pointing out, that the works of God might be displayed in him. And that's not necessarily for every person's sin, but this man, this specific person, was born to blindness so that Jesus could heal him on this day and display God's mighty works. And that's the reason. So then in verse 6, interesting thing happens. He spits on the ground, makes mud with the saliva, anoints the man's eyes, puts it on his eyes, and then tells him to go wash in the pool Siloam. Why? Why didn't he just heal it like boom? Well, I think it's the same answer as why the man was born blind, so that the works of God might be displayed in him. God through Christ is displaying his power in a different way than just saying the words and he is healed of his blindness. He could do that. He's already shown that he could do that. He's doing it in a different way as a lesson, an object lesson of how Jesus can cleanse sin, how he can heal people. And he's doing it through these means. And that's why Jesus does everything he does, so that God may be glorified. Everything points to God. Well, the people reject it, and they say, oh, this man, verse 16, this man is not from God, for he does not keep the Sabbath. That's a legalistic tradition, and you can heal people on the Sabbath is the point, and they say you can't, and they're just looking for a way to make Jesus wrong because they're judges, and they want to be judgy. And the objection to that, though, was, well, how can a man who's sinful do mighty works? So obviously they're not denying the mighty works here. It's true. And there's really no answer to that. The Pharisees are constantly being exposed for their poor logic and reasoning. And we'll see that at the end today, and end of chapter 10. So then they question the man, and he says, verse 25, look, I don't know if he's a sinner. One thing I know is that I was blind and now I see. That's where we get the amazing song, Amazing Grace. Amazing song. Amazing Grace. I once was blind, but now I see. The man begins to refute the rulers, the man who was blind. He says, this is amazing. You do not know where he comes from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not listen to sinners, but if anyone is a worshiper of God and does his will, God listens to him. And so it's obvious to this, poor, dumb, blind sinner that he is God. And that is how it is for us. I mean, we know that Jesus is real. We know that these things are true. When we read them, the truth testifies themselves to our hearts. And yet we ignore or object or refute, or we just push it aside and say, I don't want to care about that right now. And the truth is always accusing us of what's real. And if we were to seek God, the answers are there. But we don't want the answers. And that's what they don't want that. Look, this is very simple. You guys are like astounded at what's happening here. But it's very simple. Jesus is God as he says he is. He's doing mighty miracles to prove it. He's not even just saying it and holding you guilty for not believing his word, even though he is God. You should. He's giving you miracles so that you can attest to it. And yet, they fail to see. In verse 39 is the judgment on them. He says, for judgment I came into this world. That means that he's here so that no one has any excuse. They saw Jesus in the flesh, and they still refused salvation. So when they're in hell for eternity, God can rightly say, you had no excuse. You saw Jesus in the flesh. And that's why he came, so that he could, do what he said he was going to do, and people would have no excuse when they reject him. He said that those who do not see may see, and those who see may become blind. So those who admit that they can't see would receive salvation. They're poor and needy. They're poor in spirit, and they admit it, and so God answers them and opens their spiritual eyes to who Jesus is so that they may have salvation, as opposed to those who see, who think that they are in the light. In other words, they may become blind. They will live in darkness the rest of their life until they admit that they're in darkness, and then they will see. So that's the paradox that Jesus is showing here. So the Pharisees are like, are we blind? And Jesus says, if you were blind, if you were truly blind, you would have no guilt. But you see me as clear as day, and you say you don't see me, so you have guilt. Because you say that you can see. You say that you're seeing correctly. Instead of the way that Nicodemus came to Jesus in chapter 3, genuinely curious. He says, Master, we know that you're from God because you do these mighty works. And ultimately, Nicodemus is genuinely searching for the truth because something's not lining up in his head. And that's okay if something's not lining up perfectly. But come to God with humility, with your genuine questions, that he would, and accept the answers when he gives them to you. So we immediately go into chapter 10, and it's along the same line. So the Pharisee says, are we blind? And Jesus says to them in 10 verse 1, truly I say to you, he who does not enter the sheepfold by the door, Jesus is the door, but climbs in by another way, that man is a thief and a robber. So if you try to say you're on the road to heaven without coming through Jesus Christ, then you're a thief and a robber. To him the gatekeeper opens, the sheep hear his voice, and he calls his own sheep by name, he leads them out. If you're a Christian, you belong to God before you heard the gospel, before you even knew that you belonged to God. This is the doctrine of election and predestination, and it's a wonderful doctrine. It's not something that should make Christians arrogant, that they belong to God before. No, it's something that should astound us. The mercy and love of God, that it had nothing to do with us, that before the foundation of the world, He chose us to be His after we heard the gospel message and followed His call as the shepherd. We belong to Him. So Jesus says here in verse 7 that He is the door, and we must go through Him into salvation. He is the good shepherd, which may or may not be an illustration back to a psalm that we all know, Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd, and I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He leads me into paths of righteousness for His name's sake. And that's what Jesus is showing. He's the fulfillment of this. The Jews always knew that God was shepherding them, but now Jesus is saying, I'm the shepherd. I'm the one that's calling you out of your sin and into the path of the path of light, the path of truth, the path of life, eternal life. And He does that through calling us and laying down His life for us. Verse 10, He shows the comparison between Him and the power of this world, Satan. He comes to steal, kill, and destroy, but Jesus comes that we may have life and have it abundantly. So we see in verse 17 that He lays down His life. He can take it up again. So He Himself goes to the cross. He can resurrect Himself. No one takes it from Him. He's in complete control here. He has authority. He's always had authority. He is absolutely sovereign, Jesus is. And in His sovereignty, He submits under the will of the Father, but He's still completely sovereign. We see some incredible truths in verses 25 through 29. Jesus says, I told you, and you do not believe me. The works that I do in my Father's name bear witness about me. It's obvious, guys. But you do not believe, and here's why. Because you're not among my sheep. And this is not like a choice you actually have. This is more teaching on the doctrine of election and predestination. Like, you're not chosen. That's why you're not hearing and seeing. And if you were among my sheep, you would hear the call, and you wouldn't be able to resist the call. This is what's known as irresistible grace. If you belong to God and He calls you, it's an inward call, an effectual call. You can't ignore that call. You will follow Him out onto the path of life, and you will continue to follow Him. And if you belong to Him, you will never perish. Verse 28, no one will snatch you out of your hand. That's the perseverance of the saints. God will keep you. If He saves you, He will keep you. And if He elected you and chose you before the foundation of the world, then He will certainly call you. And if He calls you, He will save you, justify you. And if He justifies you, He will bring that salvation to completion and bring you to heaven. And that's your perseverance. So they continue to reject His offer of salvation. Jesus says, look, it's very reasonable to believe. Verse 37, if I'm doing the work of my Father, then do not believe me. But if I do them, even though you don't believe me, believe the works. So here's what He's saying. It's very reasonable to believe in Jesus. It's a natural progression. If these works are happening, which they obviously are, then God must be doing these works. If Jesus is who He says He is, God, then we should believe in Jesus. It's just a natural, logical progression, if then. And ultimately, they're being unreasonable because of their hardness of heart, because they have not been chosen to believe, because God is leaving them in their stubbornness and their blindness. And he's doing that ultimately. Why? To be glorified. The works of sinners glorify the Lord, and also our transformation as Christians glorify the Lord. So I pray that you are his sheep, that you have heard his call, and that you have come out. And if not, don't say, well, I'm probably not elect, so I don't need to listen. Well, nobody knows who the elect is except God himself. And if you're hearing the gospel message, assume you're elect. Believe the message. Call out to him and ask him to save you, that you would leave the world and enter into the sheepfold under the good shepherd, who will guide you and lead you for the rest of your life into eternity, and you will have life and have it more abundantly.